it was the moment that I was like, I can't do this anymore. Like, I can't drink like this. I can't keep getting arrested. Like, I can't keep around. And the weird thing is that I think during the time I knew that wouldn't be the rest of my life. I was like, I know me. I'm not gonna keep doing this forever. But I think that, a lot of people say that to themselves and then they end up 20 years later. They're still saying, I'll turn it around in a day or two.
Today, I sit down with the amazing Leila Hormozi, founder and CEO of acquisition.com. The things that she has achieved in such a short amount of time is absolutely incredible. From the business lessons to the work ethic to some of her backstory, this conversation was absolutely amazing. I'm so excited to share the full conversation with you. Today's video was made possible by mulliganbrothers.com, where we're having an end of summer sale where it's buy one get one free across all the t-shirts using code SALE, and also the Memento Mori poster and the Notta journal is also heavily discounted with the link in the description. But before that, let's dive into this amazing and insightful conversation with Leila Hormozi, where you're going to learn about business, how to set up your mind and your mentality to become a successful entrepreneur. And also a mentality around Leila is that a small idea and a small business is just as hard as running a big idea and a big business. And she's gonna teach you how to think like this instead of think small. Let's dive into this amazing interview with Leila Hormozi. Usually what I ask is just to introduce yourself and what you do for somebody who wouldn't know you.
So my name's Leila Hormozi, and currently I'm the CEO of acquisition.com. Acquisition.com is essentially a portfolio of businesses that we acquire minority stake in. And prior to that, I was the CEO of Gym Launch, Prestige Labs, and Allen, there was a service company, an e-commerce company, and then a software company, and sold all three of those, and then started acquisition.com literally the next day.
I'm hoping we can sort of dive into some of the details, but there was so much there. Like, I think we're gonna have to skim a lot of it, but I'd love to dive into some of the details. But I'd love to start where you grew up, and especially for a British audience, like, how would you describe where you grew up? Like, I didn't even know what Vegas was like until I was like 20 years old. I didn't know what it would look like. So yeah, what was your childhood like? Where did you grow up?
So I grew up in Portage, Michigan, which is like a small Midwestern town. Midwest, different from the West Coast in terms of, like, people are very friendly. You all know all your neighbors. Typically, if you grow up there, you end up staying there, getting a job there, starting a family there. Not as many people, I think, are venturing out and leaving and going to the coasts. And it's definitely a different kind of mentality. It's slow. It's much slower than where I live now. And so everything is slower paced, more family focused, obviously also safer, less to do. And, what's funny is that I just remember my entire life when I lived there, always thinking, I can't wait to leave because it felt too slow for me. And out of all the amazing places that you could live in the country, not even just that, but the world, I was like, why here? And I think I felt that for a very long time, which is why I did end up leaving.
The thing that gets me, like, with your story is, and this is what I'd like to try and get across to the viewers, is do you think you were born with this sort of ambition to grow outside of the situation you were in? Or was it something that happened within your childhood that led you to that place?
I don't think that I was born with anything. I would tell you, my dad would say differently. But I actually think it was when my parents ended up getting divorced when I think I was between 8 and 9, when they separated. And my dad ended up moving out, getting an apartment somewhere. My sister ended up leaving, going to college, because she was much older than me. And then I was stuck alone with my mom in the house when they had left. And then my mother very quickly, because of the divorce, and then very quickly after their divorce, her dad passed away. And she just went into like a very dark place. And she turned to drugs and alcohol. And I witnessed that from day one. Starting to drink more, then drinking every day, and then starting to drink earlier in the day, and then until it snowballed into a complete alcoholic. And so I actually think that time in my life and living with her for the 5 years I did when she did that was probably the pivotal moment that turned me into the person I am today. Because until then, I had been sheltered by two really amazing parents who meant well, but I also think I was very sheltered and dependent on them. And in the time that I spent living with her when she was an alcoholic, she wouldn't come home for days on end. She would come home and be incoherent. She would not talk to me, ignore me. She'd always be with a boyfriend at the time, in and out of the bars. And I had to learn to take care of myself. And at the time, it was extremely hard. And I remember just a constant, perpetual feeling of stress, like in my body, like not being able to get rid of the feeling of just like complete anxiety. Because I was always worried about her. I was always worried, is she gonna be okay? Is she gonna end up killing herself today? Is she gonna end up coming home? Am I gonna be on my own? Like, what am I gonna do? But what I didn't realize was that going through that for those 5 years taught me how to take care of myself, and ultimately that I could rely on myself, which at the time, I don't think I could have known that it would do that for me. But now looking back, I see it as like that was the moment in which I would say, it was almost like it gave me the jump start to get to where I am today. Because I'm not sure that I would be able to be the leader I am if I hadn't learned how to lead myself so early on.
Could you pin it though? Could you pin down the trait that you had, or the thing that you had? Because I think you was 10 years old. There's a tragic story I remember you saying in one of your videos about where you was calling for her, and it happened on multiple occasions, but you was trying to call for her and you couldn't get a hold of her as a 10-year-old. Most 10-year-olds, I don't think would react in the same way as you did. Like, is there something you could pin down that led you to be able to do that?
Yeah. I was sitting in our guest room of, I'm sorry, when you said it, it's just like, I was sitting in the guest room of our house and I thought she was dead. And so I kept calling her phone, and I think it was like the 20th time that I called. And she didn't pick up. And then I remember thinking to myself, why do you keep calling? She's never going to pick up. She's not going to answer. And I sat there, and I remember thinking, holding the phone in my hand, I said, I'm not calling again. I'm done. And then I just thought to myself, this thought popped in my head, and I said, I need to make the rest of my life so good that it makes all of this worth it. Because the pain I felt in that moment and for those years was so great. And it was also a secret I kept to myself. I didn't tell anybody because I also still loved her, and I didn't want to get her in trouble or whatever that meant. But that was what stuck with me, was in that moment, I thought to myself, like, you have to be so good that it makes everything worth it. And I think I took that on with me, in that now when I go through anything in life, I just think to myself, make it worth it. Make the dark moments worth it by doing yourself justice and getting to the other side and getting through it and not being a victim of those dark times. I don't know how a kid at that age had that thought, but I'm super grateful I did, and I remember it crystal clear. I remember holding the phone. It was one of the phones with like a huge cord, and it was like yellow, banana phone basically. And I remember just sitting there, it was 3 a.m. and thinking that. And from that moment on, I felt like a sense of calmness, because I thought to myself, one, no longer am I gonna keep calling. She's gonna leave. Who knows if she's gonna come back? I need to focus on myself, and I need to focus on making my life better. And then the second thing was, it like lit a fire inside of me to be better, because I feel like in that moment I saw, she was a great mother to me when she was, but I saw her turn into this person that I felt was so unfamiliar to me. And the only thought I could have to myself was like, I will never do this to somebody. I never want to do this to anybody in my life and make them feel this way. And so I think what it did was that it propelled me to go in the complete opposite direction that she was in. And then it led me to, finally getting out of her house and saying, you know what, I'm gonna leave. Because she would say, if you leave, I'm gonna die. If you leave, like, I have nothing left. My life will be over. And so it felt like, in a way, a threat. Like, what does that mean, your life will be over? She wasn't stable. And I said to myself, I'm not your mother. And I remember the day I was like, I'm leaving, and I'm not coming back. Because at the end of the day, this is really harsh to say, but I said, if you die because of me leaving, it's not on me. I have to take care of myself. And that was kind of the mentality I took from that point out. And she did end up, I think, getting better, but I haven't remained in contact.
Wow. I mean, so what age did you leave at?
I was 14, 15.
Wow. So so there was a 5-year time period, was there, from when your parents divorced, going through that sort of process?
So during the time in between, I stopped staying at the house. I started, if you talked to like childhood friends, like I ended up staying with them. I had friends' parents who knew the situation with my mom, and I would basically live at their house. Like I even did chores at one of my best friend's house. They would buy groceries for me. Like it was like I basically lived there, and I would come home to get, clothes and things like that. But I kind of checked out. I was like, I'm just gonna do me and take care of myself and not be around this. And I would come back, every week or so to see what was going on, and usually the house was disgusting and I would clean it, and then I would leave again. But I just tried not to stay there because I didn't feel safe, and I didn't feel like, I didn't know who she was anymore. It wasn't the mother that I grew up with. And so I didn't want to stay there because I felt like I created my own family within my friends' families. And I think that is the truth, is like, I think she was so absent at that point in time, I felt like I had to go get what I needed elsewhere.
Alcohol is so destructive. I think, our family suffered with, my father was like a really bad alcoholic, but he wasn't in our lives, so it didn't really affect us. But like I remember I had a phone call with my grandmother one time. She was the sweetest lady. I never realized that she was alcoholic. She'd been alcoholic her whole life. And I got a phone call about, I'm going to kill myself, and I could only imagine like what that would be like to be living around that with a parent. It must be so difficult. And I'm still like, I wish it was easy to pin what the ingredient was that allowed you to grow out of that situation, because so many people through tragedy or difficult times and traumas, it feels like they do go one or the other way. They either fall victim to it or they don't become a victim and they become much stronger for it. I think there was a quote, I'm gonna mess this up because there's so many moments in your life where you was probably handed a shit hand and you just went the opposite way, and it was like, fuck you guys, like I'll show you guys wrong. But there was something you said, if I can't find it, I'm just gonna butcher it.
That's okay.
So maybe I'll just butcher it. But it was basically like, I'm gonna work as hard as I possibly can so that for the future, that the past is just the past. And it's so far behind me that all I can see is the future. Can you talk about that mentality?
I heard this statistic at one point where it was like over 50% of the past that we remember is inaccurate. And once I heard that, this like light bulb went off for me, because I think I was probably like 20 or 21 at the time, and people were always telling me, you've got to resolve things with your mom, you've got to figure out these things. And like I'd been to therapy in and out and talked to plenty of therapists and life coaches, all these things about my mother, right? And I constantly felt like it was just reopening something that I would never find a resolution to. It's like, it was shitty. She became an alcoholic. She didn't mean for it to make my life worse, but it did by consequence. Do I think she's a bad person? No. Do I think that she, created bad conditions for me? Yes. And I just realized that the more that I focused on working on my future, the less the past had power over me and the less relevant it was to my life. And especially knowing that 50% of it could be made up, I'm like, what if it was better? What if it was worse? I don't know. This is my memory and my recollection, but I don't want to live my life beholden to a past that might not even be true. It's just my perspective. That to me was the main thought. It's like, why would I let that control me when, our minds do very powerful things? It's like, I don't know in what direction it was amplified, but right now, allowing me to think that things were worse than they were, how's that going to help me make a better future? It's not. And so I just went heads down and like, I'm going to create such a compelling life for myself that I don't even think about the past. And that's worked for me for the last 13 years.
Normally I'd stick to sort of the documentary stuff, but I have to pick up on this because it's really close to me. So around 7 years ago, just before Mulligan Brothers started, like the whole YouTube stuff, my son passed away. And my way of dealing with it was to do this. And I head down, was obsessed, still am, but was obsessed. But I would say 2 years ago, there was a point where everybody around me was telling me how, you know, it wasn't great for me, I need to go to therapy, all this kind of stuff. So I did, and it felt like I was just churning up, and for a good year, churning up this thing and bringing all this, like, this stuff back. Now I'm back heads down again, you know, and I'm focusing forward and just cracking on, and I feel better than ever. But the opinion of people with that kind of mentality is that it's just wrong. It's not the right way to do it. I'd love to hear more on it.
I mean, there's a lot that we could go into there, which is like, it's also like, you know, there's great waitresses and there's awful waitresses. There are great therapists, there are awful therapists. How does the person in the room know to judge? Oftentimes they don't. And so I think a lot of people fall prey to people that create dependency on them. You know, I actually think in studying what I have, which is in studying like some of the best, you know, psychiatrists and therapists from 100 years ago, most therapy should only take 6 to 8 weeks. And I think that we created a culture in which people are dependent on therapy so that they can keep coming back and they get recurring revenue. So I look at it more as like, that's a great business model for a therapist. Is that good for the patient? Probably not. Also, through a lot of the things that I studied, I just realized there is also self-therapy, which is that you can therapize yourself. Now, who I've studied the most for this has probably been Albert Ellis. I've read like all of his books. But I think that what I've realized is that you can change how you behave despite whatever happened to you. And so most people say, let me figure out why this happened. Like, why are you so upset about your son? Of course you're fucking upset. What the hell? You know what I mean? Like, of course I'm upset that I'm about, what the hell? Like, that's normal and okay to be that upset. But is there anything that can be done about it? It's like, no. And then I think that people tend to demonize maybe the way that we feel afterwards and say that there must be something wrong with you for feeling depressed. That's baffling to me that people would think that there's anything wrong with feeling depressed or anxious or, you know, like you have something wrong with you. Because I think when we feel like the true depths of negative human emotions, we do wonder if there's something wrong with us. But that's just life. And I think that we live in a society where people label it as there's something wrong with you. And I think I actually fell prey to it for a few years where therapists were telling me there was something wrong with me. And I, you know, after that, I kind of took a step back. I was like, I think there's something fucking wrong with you because you're labeling me, you know, and I'm doing all these things to make my life better. And you keep telling me why it shouldn't be and why it's okay to feel this way and keep reopening these wounds. And I just noticed it wasn't helping. But what did help every time was that I focused on the future and I changed my behavior. And I didn't allow anything that's ever happened to me in the past to be a reason of why I behave a certain way today. You know, I could easily say, oh, I don't get close to people. I've got walls up because my mother was an alcoholic, and so I'm a little colder. What? I'm a fully functioning 31-year-old adult. I can decide to act in a more productive way in my relationships. So what happened when I was 14 should affect what happens when I'm 31? Like, what happens is that an event occurs, and then oftentimes to deal with that event, we take on unproductive behaviors, and then we don't stop, and they go on for 10 or 15 years. And then we say, well, in order to change this unproductive behavior, I should figure out why this thing happened to me and put reason behind it. And I've just found that, what if I just changed the unproductive behavior, and it didn't matter why I was doing it, but I changed it anyways? And so I think that's the kind of approach that I've taken to things, is I look at it very much like I am not in control always. We don't choose the thoughts and feelings we have some days. Like, we can choose to focus on things, but can I choose if it pops up in my head? Like, no. I can observe it and try not to focus on it. But what I can do is that despite what I think and despite what I feel, I can change my behavior. And that has been like the one thing that has brought me relief in everything, because I can feel as bad as I want. I don't have to act that way. And I think that I've gotten a lot of relief from that. But I don't know, for me, it felt very unproductive talking about all of those things, because I think that a lot of them also are predicated on, I think that, imagine this, right? somebody dies and you live in one of the Western or Eastern Indian countries, right? They celebrate death and they're happy and they're overjoyed that those people are dead. And then they move on and go on with their lives. Here, we're told it's a bad thing and we should be sad. And therefore people grieve for months, years, decades. And so when I hear that, I think to myself, it's all, in a way, expectations, societal norms, and almost the placebo effect. I remember when I broke up with a boyfriend and then I moved across the United States to California, and a therapist told me, and she was probably the only good therapist I've ever had, I said, I just can't get over him. I'm just so sad. And she's like, well, how long has it been? And I said, 2 months. She's like, how long were you together? 14 months. She's like, why are you still sad? And I was like, well, I heard it takes like half the time you've been with somebody to get over them. She said, I think that's bullshit, Leila. And in the moment, I was stunned that a therapist would say that's bullshit. And I was like, what do you mean? She's like, it takes however long you decide it to take. Start living your life again. And that frame I've applied to pretty much everything, because I have just found that continuing to think about things that don't make our lives better just tend not to help us.
Definitely. And I heard you say that as well about the ex and saying that you just decided. And I love that. And I think it does feel the same for me. Like, that's exactly what it felt like. Like, obviously I'm sad, like, don't get me, like, it's terrible, like, I feel sad, I feel devastated, but I don't need to be there forever, like, I don't need to wallow in that and let it, affect my life massively. But it was true, like, a lot of therapists would tell me that, you need to explore this, you need to explore your feelings, your emotions, and, I think they try, if there is, like you say, a behavior, they try and fix what that is, when the inciting thing, the thing that incited the behavior, it doesn't need to be attached to it anymore. And I mean, I think it was the conversation you had with Lisa Bilyeu. I think there was so many like nuggets in there. Again, I'd love to go over them. That one was a huge one for me. There was another one. Again, like, I don't want to butcher these, but this was the I really liked this one, and it was based on anxiety. And if you have anxiety, like, I want to talk specifically about when you first went on stage, but like, just away from that, like you said, you don't have to feel great. When you're stepping into a boardroom or onto stage or whatever situation it is, you don't have to feel great. You can accept that. And once you've accepted that, it makes it easier. It's not to feel perfect the whole time. And then you kind of work your way through it one step at a time afterwards. That mentality, I think, is another thing that not having that stops people from doing it in the first place. Taking those steps.
I think I found for me that the more that I try to get rid of a feeling, the more I feel it. If I'm feeling frustrated, or I'm feeling angry, or I'm feeling anxious, and then I think, oh, you shouldn't feel this way. I don't want to feel like this. Let me go do something to try and not feel like this. I actually create more of it because I think I'm just guessing. It's like I'm telling myself it's not okay. And therefore now I'm stressed about feeling stressed. I'm not just stressed. I'm now stressed of feeling stressed. And so for me, I've just found that what has worked best has been, I accept that I'm going to feel awful. And I can get really good at feeling awful. In fact, I think that I have mastered feeling awful. And that's what people don't get. They're like, how do you do all these things? I'm like, I'm really great at doing anything feeling awful. Like, I can speak on stage while I feel awful. I can lead a meeting while I feel awful. I can do a presentation while I feel awful. I can run a book launch while I feel awful. I can do all these things while I feel awful. And I think that most people, when they feel awful, act awful. They stay in bed. They act depressed. They act how they feel. And what I have found is that just compounds the feeling of bad. Whether it's stress, anxiety, or awfulness, grief, etc., you feel more that way because you behave that way. For me, what I've found is that, one, eventually I will start to feel less awful if I stop thinking about it and I start doing the thing, right? Because I'm going to be more focused on what I'm doing than how I'm feeling. And then second to that is, if I can do something while feeling awful, how easy is it to do it when I feel good? How much more skilled will I be at that thing? And so I've looked at it in that way, which is like, I seek out to do things in imperfect conditions, because then when there are perfect conditions, I have an unfair advantage. I don't feel awful today. I got a full night's sleep. I'm prepared. Amazing. This is going to be a cakewalk, because I'm used to being up all night the night before, being stressed, not being prepared because something was last minute, and doing it anyways. And so, does it feel good in the moment? No, but it creates a sense of confidence that then turns into a feeling of trust with myself. And that is something that is worth so much more to me than feeling good every day. Because shit will be hard whether you want it to or not. And you never know what to expect. Things can just come out of nowhere. And all of a sudden it's just like, this is what it is. Like, we're going into a really hard season. And I don't ever want to go into a season like that in my life feeling like, I don't know if I've got my back. Can I do this? I want to know, like, there is insurmountable evidence that I can do this.
Do you enjoy performing in the chaos more than performing in like a nice situation?
Enjoy? No. Find useful? Yes. Okay. I think it is more useful than performing when things are going well.
So you don't get off on, it just being mayhem?
After the first step.
Okay.
I think that it's still hard to do things when you feel awful. But I know, I'm like, if you just take the first step and you just commit to this, it will feel easier for the second step. And so to say that I'm hungry for it and look forward to it, like, yes and no. Like, actually, I'm like, oh, I wish I could just, not have to do that. But then the other voice inside of me is like, this is what makes you who you are. This is why you're going to be better in other situations. This is going to make you a stronger person. You're going to have more trust in yourself after this. And then that makes me excited because I think, again, how do you make a bad situation worth it? You figure out what good can come from it. And I think that is what I look forward to, is seeing how in months or in years, me showing up in those situations will apply to future situations that I didn't even know were to come.
Yeah, I think being able to perform, like you say, at that kind of level with that kind of chaos going off, then when it is a little bit calmer, you're going to kill it. I do want to try and dial it back a little bit into the story, just to make sure I've got this there. There's so many interesting points to choose from, but I think the early days, there's a great story around Subway. I don't know whether it's been covered too much, but I would love to hear it again. Yeah. But I also am interested in if it intertwines with that story. Was there at that point a belief in your head that you were going to be somebody, that you was going to achieve something? And if there was, did it come from anywhere in particular?
I don't think I ever, in my early days, had a belief, oh, I'm going to be somebody, whatever that means. But I think that the mentality I had was, don't stop until you are. Do I believe that I can get there? At that time, no. But did I believe I could work harder than anybody? Yes. I believed I could, and work harder than anybody is relative, but I think I knew that I could put in the work to at least have a chance at it. And I think that was the one thing that, I think I got that from my dad. He was an immigrant, he came from Iran, and I've watched him my entire life, and he has tireless work ethic. And he always said, you don't have to be the smartest, you don't have to be the best, but you can work harder than everybody. And he's like, that's the approach I've always taken. And my dad is a fantastic person, but I believe him because I think he does outwork everybody just because he cares, and that's part of who he is. And so I think seeing that, I think, was a really great example for me, because early on, after I got out of the house with my mother, that was my mentality, which was just work on yourself, work on being better. And that's when I got my first job. And I got my job, it was at Subway, which I could walk to from my house, from my dad's house, because I moved in with him. And at that point, I think I had my driver's permit. So I couldn't actually drive a car yet, so I knew I could walk. And I was like, well, that's good, because one, I can get exercise when I go there and back because I was trying to get in better shape. And then two, I can have a job, right? And they were one of the only places that would take somebody that was not 16 yet. And so that was my first job, and it was purely to make money. I was just I need this money to save up to buy things I want. It was just, that was it. It wasn't oh, I'm going to work so hard on all these things. I think I just accepted that I need to start from the bottom, because I remember being embarrassed at times. People would come in, I'm like a Subway sandwich artist. I'm making their Subways. And I'm a girl also, there's more men that worked there. And it was the subway right next to my competitor high school. So all the football team would come there and get subs, or all like, and so it was a little embarrassing at times. But I think it was really good for me, because what that job taught me to do in the beginning was, and I think this is a skill, but how to follow directions. That sounds silly, but there are so many people who you can give directions to and they don't follow them. And I think that I learned at that job that is a skill, because I saw all these other people that were working there get fired because they wouldn't make a sandwich correctly, because they wouldn't do the opening or the closing correctly, like simple things. But they are skills nonetheless. And I'm grateful that I started there, because I think it was humbling and it wasn't glamorous, and none of my first jobs were. But they taught me things that in the moment I didn't realize were important, and I look back on now and I can pinpoint everything I gained from each one.
Yeah, there's a quote by Steve Jobs, again, like not word for word, but the dots will connect looking back. Like and it does it, you don't know going forward. But yeah. I think we've had it with Mulligan Brothers and all the jobs we worked, like labouring jobs and all this kind of stuff. And there's so many different things. And I think the biggest one is honing work ethic for us was a huge thing. Like, I'm gonna load more bricks than anybody on site. That's just what I'm gonna do, because that's what I do. Like, and I don't think there was a reason. I didn't get paid more for it, but it just felt like that was the thing. How valuable is work ethic, and how far can it take you?
I think that in the beginning, it is probably one of the most valuable skills you can have, because when you're just getting started, oftentimes it's not that you lack one skill or even two, but you might lack 3 or 4 or 5 skills. And the only thing, in my opinion, that can get you past that wall is having the tenacity and having the work ethic to be able to do all at the same time. Because even when you take on a new job, say you take on a new business, whatever it is in life, usually we have a learning curve. And what I think a lot of people miss is that it's a learning curve on multiple skills at the same time. And that's when things feel really hard. Why do most people fail at building a business? Because it's like 10 skills at the same time. And most people can work on 2, but they can't work on all 10. And I think that is why I believe work ethic was such an imperative part of my journey, because I think in realizing, for example, when I was losing weight, I lost almost 100 pounds when I was 19, 20. And that process was, it's not just that you're starting to work out, but you're also learning how to cook food. You're also learning to measure food. You're also learning to, not eat at party. Like, those are all skills, and prior to this, I was in fitness and nutrition. So I could tell you all those things are skills. Not taking food when people ask, not finishing food on your plate, skill. Counting your calories, a skill. Knowing that there's calories in soda, skill. These are all, like, it sounds crazy, but they really are. Remembering to weigh yourself every day is a skill. Measuring yourself with tape is a skill. They're all skills. And so I actually think that translated a lot when it came to business, because it felt like this insurmountable task that was very hard, and it was a very steep learning curve. But once you get over the hump, it feels inevitable that the outcome is going to happen, because it starts to snowball. And I think business is the same way. But a lot of people can't get past, I think, the first year or 2 years of the learning curve. They just quit. They say, it's not working for me. I've been working my ass off for a year. Go another year. I think that a lot of people don't realize that they're accumulating, maybe in that first year, they've accumulated 2 skills, but they need 2 more to be able to get what they want. And they just aren't willing to wait it out. And so then they go and try something else, or they go and work on something else. But they don't realize that what they actually have to work on is expanding their capacity for work more than anything.
I'm going to have to come back to that at the end for the business, because I think we have just used work ethic to get to where we are. And it's like, I know obviously like you're on this insane level with teaching higher level people, but I think that start section, you guys had to do that at the start. Like, you had to go from work ethic to structure and all these other things.
And it ebbs and flows.
Yeah.
It depends on the season you're in.
So yeah, I'd love to talk about that. But the one thing that comes to my mind, 100-pound weight loss journey. One time, it was one of the most embarrassing. There was two kind of stories that happened to me at a very similar time period of my life. I'd put on a lot of weight after my son had died, and unhealthy habits. I was over 100 pounds overweight, and I was walking down the streets and I'd bought like a carrier bag of fries, like it's chips in the UK, and I'd smelt them whilst I was walking home like a fat person would. And someone screamed out the car, "You fat bastard," to me. And I was big at the time as well. And I was really like taken aback. And then I went home, looked in the mirror, I was like, flipping heck, you're massive right now. And then there was another story a week or so after where a friend's mum who hadn't seen me for years was the same thing. She said, "Jordan, what happened to you?" And you had this like story, this pivotal moment where you was at a party and a similar thing happened, but you took it as a positive and you managed, again, it was like, fuck you guys, like I'll show you guys. Did that last, you know, and that was it from that point on. Can we hear about the story, and just sort of what was going through your head when it happened?
Yeah, so when I want to say I was 19, I was really overweight. I think at that point, I'd gained like 80 something pounds. It was to the point where it's like, I can't even find a picture because I completely avoided a camera. Like there's one and it's just my head and it's pretty bad, but that's it. And I remember it was the weekend of my friend's birthday, and she said she wanted to have a party and she was gonna invite a bunch of people from high school. And immediately I just felt like a complete sense of anxiety wash over me because I thought, oh my gosh, I looked so much better then, you know, but I've like spiraled into gaining all of this weight. And I felt like, oh gosh, I really hope I don't run into anybody. And so the weekend comes and, you know, it's the start of the party. I think we're pre-gaming, whatever. People are coming in, nobody's saying anything, right? And it's like this big, for me, it felt like an elephant in the room. Like, hi, I haven't seen you since I gained 80 pounds, right? Like, I am aware of this. And nobody was saying anything. It was all going as planned. Like, it felt fine. And then it was probably close to the end of the night, and I went to go to the bathroom, and I walked through the hallway, and there was this guy that I'd been friends with in high school who was there. And I saw him, and I was like, oh, hey. And he was like, hey. And he was like, man, such a shame. And I was like, what? And I just like in that moment knew he was gonna say something. And he's like, dang, he's like, it was so crude. But it was like, it's really just a shame because like you used to be so hot, but you're just so fat. And I was like, wow. And in that moment, all I felt was like white hot, like your eyes see red, you know, like white hot rage. And funny enough, it was not at him at all. It was completely at myself, because my first thought after he said it was, I agree, you're right, I would. And it was like, I couldn't even be mad at the guy, because I'm like, what are you doing, stating the facts? Like, I'm aware as well. And I left early and I went home, and I just felt so compelled to do something. I remember I got on Facebook, because Facebook was cool at the time, and I made a post that was like, I'm done. I'm done partying. You're not gonna see me. I have to go work on some things. Like, I'm out. It was just this ominous, very vague post. And that was the day I woke up the next morning and I threw out all the food in my house that was junk. I literally drove to Planet Fitness, joined Planet Fitness gym, and then I said, I'm done drinking. It was like, in that instant, I made this decision where I thought to myself, it just felt like it was a deviation from the path I was on, being that overweight. And in that moment, I felt like, am I gonna let this get worse? You know, am I gonna show up 2 years from now at a party? What am I gonna be, 400 pounds? Because like, if we continue to go down this path at the rate I've gained weight, that's what would happen. And that thought, when I had that, where I was like, what if I were to show up in that many years and be, what's stopping me from that? Why stop now? You keep gaining weight, what's gonna stop? And then I just thought, it was so unacceptable of a thought to me. I was like, that cannot be my future. It was so terrifying that I felt like I had to immediately change in that moment. And that's been something that's served me so much throughout my life, which is like, there are times when incremental change makes sense. And then there are times when there's so much inertia in one direction, the wrong direction, that I think you need to just completely put a stop to it And in that moment, that was one of those. I was like, we need to go snowball in the other direction. And so instead of like, let me just slowly make life, I was like, screw it. Everything goes out the window today. New Leila. I am no longer who I was. I am now this new person. You eat well, you don't hang out with people who drink all the time, you don't do drugs all the time, and you work out. And it was really hard and terrifying because I had not been out of shape before. But going into a gym being overweight was so hard for me. Like walking in there, feeling like everyone was staring at me, feeling like I was out of shape, you know, saying no to all of the social things I'd been going to and drinking at, it was really hard for me. I didn't know how to say no to people and say like, that's not what's best for me right now. And then basically I ended up actually moving out of the house I was in because I lived with 5, 6 other roommates in a house. And I felt like that environment is not one that is conducive with the future that I want. And I don't think staying here is going to help me reach my goals. And so I moved out, and the last, I think, year and a half that I was in college, I lived by myself, which is like unheard of, you know, especially for a woman. But I just didn't know another way that I could like cold turkey stop. I needed to change my environment.
You've got these moments in your life where you've had like these inflection points where you've had big changes. I think you referred to them before as like rock bottom. And I think there's a story of your 6th arrest. What I would love to maybe talk about, like maybe the first arrest. Like what was one of those moments like? Like was that a moment where you realized it was too much, or was that did they just sort of happen as they came along?
You know, it's funny because I don't think that the first even 3 or 4 times that I got arrested, I didn't think it was a big deal. And I think that a lot of people would assume that I would have. But one, context of like the town I was in, lots of people got arrested. It wasn't like a novel thing. The people I hung out with got arrested. Wasn't a novel thing. Some of them had been to jail or prison. So it wasn't weird based on the people I hung out with. And then I think even further to that point, I think there's this shift that happens when you're in your early 20s. And I don't know anything about the science of it, but all I know is that until a certain point in my life, I felt invincible. I felt like I could do things. I could drive drunk. I could drink. I could act all sorts of ways, and I wouldn't have to bear the consequences that others would. And I think that, I know that there's a saying in the Army where they say it's like the best friend syndrome or something to that degree. I would have to look it up. And basically what it is that they ask everyone that joins the Army, are you afraid of dying? And they say, no, I'm not afraid of dying, but I'm worried Jimmy, my best friend's gonna die. Well, interview all the people that come to the Army, literally everyone's worried about their friend and not themselves. And what are the stats? Some of them are gonna die. And I think that the same went for me at that point in my life, which was like, oh, I understand where this is going, but that won't be me. I'm not gonna be one of those people. I'm not actually gonna end up getting put in jail. I'm not actually gonna end up drinking myself to death. I'm not actually going to end up with any of those things. And it wasn't until my dad, on my 6th arrest, I woke up at my parents' house and my father was waiting downstairs for me, which was like the worst, one of the most sickening moments of my life, to wake up there where I didn't live, have a ticket next to me of my arrest, and then have to walk downstairs to confront them. It was just like opening the door to walk down was like, I can still feel how I felt in that moment. It was awful. And I remember thinking that he was going to like come down on me, tell me how awful I am, he doesn't want to talk to me again, whatever. And I was prepared for that. But what I wasn't prepared for was that I walked down and he was sitting on the couch with my stepmother. And he looked at me and he just looked sad. And he said, I'm not gonna try and control you. I'm not gonna try and threaten you. I'm not gonna try and do anything. I just wanted to let you know that I am worried if you continue to do this, that you're going to kill yourself. And it was like, in that moment, the fact that he thought that would happen to me, it was just baffling. And that was what, in my mind, that was the thing that made me like, I can't do this anymore. I can't drink. My father is like the nicest person. He came here from Iran. He started this family. He's only done everything to try and make my life better. He tried to get me out of my mom's house. Like everything that he's done for me, he's been a fantastic father. And to feel like I put him in a situation where he's worried that I'm going to kill myself. And I respect my dad's opinion. It was the moment that I was like, I can't do this anymore. Like I can't drink like this. I can't keep getting arrested. Like I can't keep fucking around. And the weird thing is that I think during the time I knew that wouldn't be the rest of my life. I was like, I know me. I'm not going to keep doing this forever. But I think that, a lot of people say that to themselves and then they end up 20 years later. They're still saying, I'll turn it around in a day or two. And I realize that that's a really poisonous thing to think, is like you think, oh, I'm going to eventually do it. It's like, well, why isn't eventually just today? If you're going to do it eventually, you might as well do it now.
Take away where you are now, and if you delivered me a story before your dad said that, given the history of your family, 6 arrests, like what the story ends differently. Like without your dad coming in and saying that, like I think you're right. Like I'll do it tomorrow. I'll do it tomorrow. I'll do it tomorrow. Kick it down the can far enough down the road, and yeah, it does maybe end where your dad said it would. Like, do you think that could have been a reality? For me, it's if you didn't have a role model like your father, like what did the situation look like?
I think my dad has been the anchor for me many times in my life. After I moved out of my mom's house, I moved in with my dad, and I was very angry. Like, I think very angry. And I don't think that's like an emotion that, I think a lot of girls get sad, but I was angry and like raging at all points and times, at everybody. And my dad was so empathetic and so patient with me. And he was, in many ways, I think he was the reason I was able to stop acting that way, because it was like no matter what, he didn't let me skip any commitments I had. He was like, you're still gonna do all these things. It doesn't matter what's going on with your mother. It doesn't matter how you feel. It doesn't matter all this. Like, you've got to stick with your commitments. So to that degree, I think he anchored me a lot at that age. And then I think as I got older, when I was spiraling, drinking all the time and doing drugs, having him say that again, it's not like it was something I didn't know, but I think sometimes having somebody from the outside say it is much more powerful, especially in those moments where you're convincing yourself otherwise. And I think that that's what my dad has done for me so many times in my life, is he's kind of pulled it, he has just provided me with a mirror at which to accurately see myself. And I don't know if anyone else would have done that, because I think that what I was doing was not abnormal for the people around me, but it was for him. And I think that that's why I'm so grateful for him, because my whole life he's been that. He's just been the anchor. I think there's been so much fluctuation. Life changes so much. There's all these things. Even my dad, one day he won't be here. But while he is a complete rock for me. And I think he's also inspired me to do that for other people.
If you're enjoying this interview with Leila Hormozi, please consider heading over to mulliganbrothers.com, who is today's sponsor, where you can get buy one, get one free across all the t-shirts on the website, and also the Memento Mori poster and the Nota Journal are heavily discounted with the link in the description. Use code SALE at checkout for the buy one, get one free offer. Let's dive back into the video.
Is there a particular moment or story that would encapsulate or describe your dad to somebody else?
Yeah, I don't even know why I'm crying, but I remember when I moved out of my mom's house and in with my dad, I was so anxious and I was so scared, mad, whatever. I felt so weird because I moved in with him. He was now married, and then they had her kids in the house, and then it was just me. And I felt so out of place. Like, I felt like I left my mom's house, which wasn't safe and such, but I at least felt like that was my home I grew up in. It was people I knew. I moved in with my dad, and I felt so much unfamiliarity. I hadn't been as close with him growing up as I had been with my mother. So it felt weird at first. He wasn't, at that point, I wouldn't have considered my dad the rock I do now. It became that after I moved in with him. But I remember I told him I didn't feel like it felt like home. And I would lay awake at night feeling like this isn't my house. I feel scared, I feel uncomfortable. And I remember one day I came home And my dad I had been looking, and I think we were at a store, and I saw this furniture set, and it was, you have to think, I'm 15, a girl at the time, and it had this beautiful white crested vanity and bed and dresser, and it was so beautiful. And I remember I was like, oh my gosh, this is so pretty, it's so beautiful, but it was so expensive, and I wasn't thinking I would ever get furniture anyways. We always had hand-me-down stuff. We never got like new stuff. And I remember I came home one day and I walked into my room and it was all the furniture that I'd seen at the store. And my dad looked at me and he was like, you deserve everything. Like, I want you to feel comfortable here. I want you to feel safe and at home. And I remember thinking to myself, like, I just don't deserve you as a father, because I was so angry. And it's so funny because I broke down in tears because I felt so undeserving of that furniture. I couldn't even fathom that my dad spent that much money on it for me, who was acting like a complete asshole. But that's who he is. He's the guy that shows up when you're acting like a complete asshole, and he's there to be like, but you're not. Like, this isn't who you are, and you're gonna get back on track. And he's unwavering in that instance. Like, no matter how I'm feeling, my dad doesn't change how he shows up. And I think that that's why I consider him to be a rock. And that's what I think that I have been able to emulate for others, which is like, no matter how angry somebody is, no matter how sad they are, no matter how depressed, I won't waver. And therefore they can rely on me, because how they feel isn't going to change how I show up. And I think that was like the best gift he could have given me, because to this day he does that.
That's so wonderful as well, because what your dad did has impacted thousands of people through yourself as well. And this is like everything that we do, we genuinely like push this message of inspire change, and it's through action. It's through action and actually doing something like what your father did. Of course he's going to be there for you. It's such a wonderful moment as well. But him doing that and installing that in you has sort of installed this same belief system for you to be there for other people. Yeah. And it's had such an impact, and it spreads so much. I think it's so important that people don't realize that you don't have to have 1 million followers on Instagram to really impact the world or change somebody's life. Like, it happens as everybody is a part of that. I think it's so beautiful. And that brings me on to like a lot of, obviously you're in the business world, and I think there's a quote that you said about, it's not about the money just allows me to impact more people. Is that where this comes from then?
I think it does come a lot from him. I think that I grew up with my father telling me, nothing is worth doing things you don't enjoy. No amount of money. And, part of me believed him, part of me didn't. Part of me was like, I'll find out for myself. But no, I didn't actually, in the sense of everything I pursued up until I met Alex was only to learn and to figure out what I really wanted to do and how I could help people. And it wasn't until I met Alex that I feel like it's almost like the bridging of him and my father, having both of their perspectives, has given me mine, which was, my dad always said, follow your passion, do what you love, do what you can to help other people. And I would do that at the sacrifice of myself. And so I think that was where that went wrong, was that I wasn't taking care of myself. I wasn't, giving myself the oxygen mask first. And then I met Alex, and he said, why on earth can you not have both? Why can't you do things you love and have passion over and also make money? And that was it sounds so simple, but it was such a frame shift for me. And I was like, I don't know, I guess I can. He's like, yeah, I don't think it's an either or. And I don't think he knows how much that impacted me. It was like our second date that we had, because I was telling him everything I was doing at the time. And I think my goal since then has been like, how can everything be a win-win? How can the business that I create be a win for me in making money, me in impacting other people, my employees in the job that they have that they get to enjoy, and the partners that we work with in the relationship that we provide, and the community that we affect. And I think that that's been what my frame shift has been, is just, if you don't know how it can, how a situation or a business can give you all of the things, then you're not thinking creatively enough. You haven't beat the idea up enough. Because if you beat it up enough, you will think of a business that can make a lot of money, impact a lot of people, inspire a lot of change, and help all these other people too. And I think that that's what I have realized, is just, I wasn't creative enough at the time. I didn't know what my options were. I didn't even know some of the things that existed. And so my frame of reference was very small. Now my frame of reference is much bigger, and I do believe completely, because I think I'm living it, that you can do all of it.
Yeah, and I think it is a resource as well. Money as a resource is powerful, like it is. There's no denying that you do need it to have, you don't need it, but it's a massive ingredient, I think, to be able to impact more people. I don't want to keep diving into deep stories. You've been so gracious with sharing, but I'm interested to hear maybe something you haven't shared with anyone before, like a story that would sort of encapsulate who Alex was and that would describe him to somebody else through something that he's done or some sort of action that he's done for you.
I can give you two different stories to show you the two sides. I think the first story, on our second date, Alex said, can you come over and I'll barbecue? And, we'll make some steaks, we'll do whatever, all this stuff. And so I said, sure. So I came to his house and I said, where's the steak? He's like, oh, we'll go get them together. I was like, okay, amazing. We go to the grocery store. He's like, you go get all of these things and I'll grab this thing, whatever it was. And we split up and then we grab the food and then we go back. We get back to his place. And I say, okay, sir, are you cooking the steaks? And he's like, oh no, I don't know how. And I said, what? He's like, well, I meant like come over. But he's like, but do you know how to cook steaks? And I was like, well, do you know how to cook potatoes? He's like, no. I was like, do you have a barbecue? He's like, no. And I was like, oh my God. So then I'm trying to figure out, I'm like, wait, okay, there's barbecues outside at the pool of the place you live. And he's like, oh yeah, great, amazing, let's do that then. And it turned from, he invited me over to cook me this dinner to, we go to the grocery store, we get them, and then I cook the dinner, right? And I thought it was so funny because as much as some people might think like ridiculous, it was like my first lesson in learning, because the whole time I'm cooking anything, preparing, he's like, oh, you're really good at this. You're really great at this. Good job. You're doing amazing. And Alex has this way of, when he doesn't want to do something, encouraging somebody else to get the thing done, which I don't think I really nailed down until a few years into our relationship. At the same time, I think that's the Alex that a lot of people see, especially on social media. That's probably the dynamic. We kind of play around like that. I think Alex will do anything to ensure that I feel good. And what I mean by that is, it's not always what's easy, but he will do what makes the most sense. So in the beginning, when we started Gym Launch, it was like we were doing everything together. And we met with somebody who said, Leila, we wrote all the functions of the business on a whiteboard. And then they circled marketing and they said, this is Alex. And then they had all these other functions and they said, this is Leila. I've never done any of them before. The only thing I actually knew how to do at that point was sell. And I was like, and they were like, and you don't help her. And in that moment I was like, he doesn't help me? I have so much more. And it was so funny because what that guy told us and what Alex really respected was, he said, Alex, Leila is just as able as you to do these things in business. If you ever try to help her too much, then she won't believe in herself and you're going to rob her of that. And he really, in the hardest times, when I might be complaining, when I might be saying, I don't know how to do this, I can't figure this out, Alex is like, all he ever did was encourage me. He was like, yes, you can. You can figure this out. You don't need me. And I think that if people see him and they hear how often that man tells me that on a weekly basis, you don't need me. You can do this. It is the most empowering thing that I could ask for, because I think I see so many men want to be needed by the woman, and therefore they cripple her of her ability to do it on her own. And he has done the complete opposite, which is all he's ever done is speak life into me and tell me why I'm so good. I don't need him. You're better than me. One day I won't even be making content because you'll be making it. Like, who does that? But he does. And I don't know if without his constant encouragement, if I could even show up the way I do today, because I think he, in so many ways, helped me go from a much more insecure, very, very hardworking, very sincere, very humble, but very insecure girl when I met him, to a very confident woman, because he, in those moments when I feel like I can't keep going, feel like I can't do something, I can't figure it out, all he does is sell me on myself and why I can. He doesn't come in and try to save the day. And it's the biggest gift that he could ever give me, because he could save the day. You know, Alex is complete, I would say, like, he's got a lot of firepower and a lot of horsepower. And especially in the beginning, he had 4.5, 5 more years in business than me. So he also had more experience. But he still let me figure it out on my own. And I think that's why things are able to work between us, because that's all I've ever wanted, is somebody who can make me better, you know, and not use my moments of weakness as an advantage for themselves. And he's truly done that.
Yeah, I think a lot of people look to you guys as like this amazing couple who managed to support each other in both ways. There's a time, I think you spoke about this, where I don't know if you was in a board, you was at maybe a function, and you realized that people were speaking to Alex more, and that you felt that you were maybe in the corner a little bit, but there was a lot of people would say, oh, he's this alpha male type who's sort of overbearing in the conversation, but you didn't take it like that. You took it in a completely different way.
There's been a lot of instances where I've been surrounded by people who have told me why, in the beginning of our relationship, why maybe it was going to be very hard for me to achieve my goals being with Alex. And they always said, he's too loud. He's too overbearing. He's too big of a character. You're never going to be able to become the person that you want to become being with him. He's going to stifle you. He's going to suppress you. And it felt I felt very violated for people to be speaking that upon me about my relationship when I didn't ask for it. But the second was, when I looked at them and the fact that they were saying that, I thought to myself, what a victim mindset. You know, here's this very powerful, very smart, very, very hardworking man who's doing his damn best and he's shining. Do you think I should tell him to be quiet, to shine less, so that I can feel better? And I remember there was this moment, it was like a couple years into our relationship, when it was like suddenly I realized that in the moments when people were listening to Alex, in the moments when people were saying, oh, this must be tough since, you know, he's getting all the credit for these things, those were all opportunities for me to look at him and say, what is he doing that I am not doing? That if I did, I would get the same, right? And it's often the way he presents himself, the way he speaks on things, the amount that he might prepare for things. And I think that is lost on a lot of people when they see somebody who has so much power. They just think, I want them to have less so that I can feel like I have more. And I have found no growth in that. I have only found growth in saying, how fucking lucky am I that I'm married to somebody like that, who I can first learn from. And I've learned more from him than anybody else in my entire life. And I think we've been able to do that for each other, which is, I know that there's a lot of ways in which being married to each other benefits each of us. And I think it takes time to figure out what that is. But for me, that's been what it is that I have always erred towards the side of insecure and quiet. And marrying Alex, I've been able to find my voice and be much louder. And I think that's helped me in a lot of ways, especially in leadership. And I'm grateful for that. You know, there's never a moment now that I've ever thought to myself like, oh, I wish that these things wouldn't happen, because all it tells me is I still have room to go. You know, there's still room for me to go. I have a lot of room to develop in these areas, and it's just a journey.
I love that. I need to, just to fill in the story, could you take us from the gap between doing the sales for the personal training and the gym, all the way up until now, I guess, like, or maybe not to now, but like through acquisition.com and gym launch and all that kind of stuff, like a snippet story, so I can like dice between it.
So after I started doing personal training, because after I lost the weight and I stopped drinking, I said, I need to go be around people who are wanting more. And I felt like growing up in Portage, like, it's not a bad town or anything, but if I want to make it as easy as possible for me to achieve my goals, is this the place I should be? And the answer is no. I would go somewhere like California if I wanted to achieve my goals. And so that's what I did. I packed up, I had a Prius. I packed up my Prius and I went on Craigslist, found a place, rented the place, and drove there. I want to say it's the day after I graduated college. I think it was the day after my last class because I didn't even walk my graduation. I was like, I'm fucking out of here. Drove to California. When I got there, I said, I'm just going to find a job within walking distance. So I literally walked to every gym within walking reasonable, like 35, 40 minutes. And I applied at all of them. And I said, I will work at one of these. And at that point, I didn't know what I wanted to do. But all I knew was I want to have some kind of business in fitness. I don't know what it is. I also know that I don't have the skills right now to start a business. So I'm going to go acquire those skills by working at different jobs. And I said, I'll start as a personal trainer. Maybe I'll work my way up, eventually be a manager, marketing, whatever. And so start as a personal trainer at 24 Hour Fitness. Then once I'd been there for a little over a year, I said, this is not for me because it's literally all sales. And then when you're not selling, you're training the clients you've sold. I took many of those clients and went to a small boutique gym. And the reason I went there is that I wanted to learn from the owner because I'd heard a few things that one, he was very, very good at sales and marketing. Two, he was a very good leader. I was like, oh, well, here I've been able to learn sales, but I haven't been able to learn marketing or leadership. Not really. In fact, they even offered me a management position at 24 Hour Fitness, and I said, no way, I don't want to do that. The thought of managing people at that time in my life was like, ugh, which is crazy to think now. So ended up going to this boutique gym. And then when I was there, I started at the same time that I was at that boutique gym training clients online. Facebook ads, Instagram ads were starting to work for fitness. You started seeing people pop up that were doing online training. And so I started taking on some online clients using like Instagram. I was at this place where I had discussion with the guy who owned the gym about like, would I ascend into manager? Would I be running the gym? What would it look like? And part of me was thinking like, maybe I should just start my own. And on the other side, I actually was approached by somebody online who said, let's go 50-50 and do an online business. And this person already had a successful one on her own. And so I was at this point where I felt like, what path do I want to take? And I wasn't sure which one would get me to my goal faster. And then I met Alex on Bumble. And on our first date, I told him about this kerfluckle, whatever you want to call it, this decision that I had to make. And he was like, oh, you should do neither of those things. I was like, well, what would I do instead? He was like, you should work for me. And I was like, what? I was like, okay, this is weird. We're on a date. Like, why are you telling me I should work for you? And he said, because you'll learn more skills and you'll make more money than either of those options. And I remember being like, why is this guy doing this right now? Like, we barely know. I've said like 3 words. You're talking the whole time. You know, like, I'm like, what's going on? And it's funny because, you know, we ended up going on dates every day. We hung out every day for 3 weeks. And I told him to stop asking me for the first couple weeks. I said, this is just weird. Like, I just want to date. Like, let's just whatever. And about 3 weeks in, Alex said, he said, you know, I have this idea for this company called Gym Launch. Do you want to do it with me? I was like, no, I'm doing my own stuff right now and I still don't know you very well. He said, okay, well, I'm going to go prove concept for this business. So I'm going to fly out to this guy's gym and I'm going to be gone for like a couple weeks. And I was like, okay. And he was like, can you like watch my gyms and house? And I was like, okay. And so I remember I stayed at his house at that time. And I went to his gyms and would like pick up the cash and deposit it in the bank. And like, I just did stuff for him while he was gone. I remember thinking like, I don't even know why you trust me to like take out all the money. This is odd. We've only known each other 3 weeks. But he was like, I know that you wouldn't steal. And I was like, well, I wouldn't. So you're not wrong. And he left. He was gone for 3 weeks. He was basically trying out this concept of Gym Launch where we would sell people into these gyms. And we would do the marketing. We would do the sales. So it's like we would market for a gym, fly out to the gym, sit there at their front desk, do all the sales for the members, and then they would have the members to keep, and we would give the owner a percentage of the sales, but we would take most of it. So he did that for 3 weeks, and he would call me every night, and he'd be like, I remember it was FaceTime, but it would be pitch black, because he was like in the dark, just so tired, because he'd been there from 6 a.m. to usually like 8:30 or 9 p.m., and then you just do it again, right? And he would just be like, I went 6 for 6 today. I went 10 for 10 today. Like every day it was like a sales update almost. And then we talk about like, well, what could you do to get more people in? We were kind of like ping pong on like how you could get a better show rate of people, how you could close more people, like all these different things about the pitch and the script and all of that. And it was kind of fun. And then I remember he was like, I'm coming back. Can you pick me up from the airport? So I picked him up from the airport and we went back to his house and he pulled out a stack of contracts and it was like this thick. And I was like, what's this? He's like, these are all the contracts from all the people I signed up for all the gyms. And I was like, you haven't put them in the system? What is this, like 1990? And he's like, oh no, usually somebody else does that. And I was like, oh God. He's like, if you can help me, then we can go on a date after. And I was like, oh. So I remember we sat down, he like poured me a drink, which I still at this point hadn't drank much before meeting him, so it was still a lot for me. And we started processing contracts. He taught me how to use the CRM system. And at the end of it, we looked at like the grand total. It was something like $120,000. And in that moment, I was like, this works. He was like, yeah. And I remember my second question, I was like, is it legal? And he was like, yes. And I was like, I don't know, it feels illegal for some reason. And I said, you know what? I'll do it. And I think my mentality at that point in time was like, what do I have to lose? I'm 22, 23. And worst case scenario, I pick up back where I'm at right now, which is like I go back to a gym, I pick up, I tell my old clients I'm coming back, and I just do that, and then I go into one of the businesses I was thinking about. But this sounded like too much of an adventure to say no to. And so I had a week gap between me quitting the gym I was at and telling all my clients I was leaving them. And then I flew out 5 days later to Baltimore, Maryland to launch the first gym with Alex. And that was the start of what has now become Gym Launch.
Was there anything in the proof of concept, do you think, to get you on board, like from Alex's half, like to prove to you and put those contracts in front of you and say, to get you on board on the team?
What I knew was this, which is that the entire way that I had been acquiring clients was old phone lists from gyms, going to like Whole Foods, approaching people that are on ellipticals at big box gyms, like complete like cold outbound, and it was very hard and took a long time to do. And when Alex showed me that he could generate business for gyms using Facebook, and then a list just appeared of leads, I was like, holy crap, it takes me weeks to get 20 leads. You can get them in a day with like, it's like 50 cents a lead. And that was the biggest thing that I knew there was something to it, because I had witnessed how hard it was for all the gyms I'd gone to, all the gym owners I knew, all the ones I'd worked at, to get leads. So the fact that he could do it that easily, that was the one piece that told me like, we've got something here that nobody else has. And so it made sense to me. I was like, if we can actually pull this off and figure out a way that this business can work, this can really have legs, because nobody's doing this right now. And what it was that gyms had not learned how to use digital advertising yet. Gyms were still doing the old methods. It was right when social media was becoming a method for, now some industries get on it earlier, but gyms, brick and mortar gym owners, they are not typically very tech savvy. They're not first forward with social media. And so it wasn't something that they had gotten into. And so it wasn't until, I think honestly, Gym Launch, that the industry completely changed.
I used to own a small women's gym, and we used to do leaflets, like thousands of leaflets. And then one day we was like, let's just run Facebook ads and like specific demographics. And it was like changed everything overnight. It was unbelievable.
Oh, yeah.
I'm super curious. Those 3 weeks when you met Alex, you must have been like, what the fuck? Who is this guy?
You know, when I first met him, I remember our first date. We met for Froyo. He wasn't overly enthusiastic. Like he barely even smiled at first, which come to find out is because I have a giant back tat, and he saw it and was like, judging. And we had Froyo, and then I realized very quickly he was just hungry because he started smiling. And then the rest of the date was talking about business for like 4 hours. And not like any other date I'd been on, but the most fun one that I had been on, because that was all I had been thinking about. Like, for the prior year and a half, I was just like heads down focused, like all I want to do is focus on my career and everything else will follow. I couldn't even, at that point, I remember thinking, I'm not planning to get married until I'm like 28 or 29, 30. At this point, I'm 22, 23. I'm not looking for my next husband. You know what I mean? And so when I met him, I just remember thinking, man, even if it doesn't work out with us, I would love to just be friends with this guy because he's so interesting. And I feel like when I was talking to him, it felt like we were on the same, I want to say like wavelength, but like we saw reality the same way. And I didn't feel that way with anybody else I'd gone on dates with. I felt like, especially probably given the area I was in, it felt like they wanted me to be a more watered down version of myself. And Alex didn't give me that impression at all. He gave me the opposite, which was like, you know, from the beginning, I think the second day, you know, questioning what I wanted to do and saying, why couldn't you do more than that? Why don't you have bigger vision for where you want to go? And I think he really, in the beginning, changed a lot of my perspective about myself very quickly and made me realize that there's a lot of bigger opportunities that I could pursue. And I think I realized I needed to be around people like that more. You know, I think that he just thinks really big and he always has. And at that point in my life, I think I was pretty insecure. And so it's almost like I might be thinking it, but I didn't want to say it because I felt embarrassed. Like I have no evidence to support that these big dreams could be reality. He didn't care. He would say it anyways. And I think that was really compelling to me because it felt like we complemented each other very well.
There's something you said before about small businesses, and sometimes you think it's more difficult to run a small business than it is a big business. Obviously you had that encouragement from Alex where it was like to think big. Do you think there is truth in that? In the, you know, people could dream a lot bigger than they are and achieve those things as well.
I think it is just as hard to start a small business as a big business, as it is a big business, because there are advantages and disadvantages on both sides. And I think that, for example, the biggest thing for me is, you know, when we decided to build acquisition.com, the main thing I was thinking is I need to be able to build a vision so big that everybody else's visions for themselves can fit inside of it. And that's how you can really get people to get on board with your vision. I think a lot of people start off with a vision and it's very hard to get people to work for them because their vision is just enough for them. There's no room for expansion, and there's no room for expansion barely beyond their vision, but not even for the people within the organization. And so it's really hard to get people on a bandwagon when your vision is so limiting. And so for me, like acquisition.com has been so much easier than Gym Launch. And mind you, when we very first started acquisition.com, there wasn't some big brand. But because the vision is so much bigger, that we can recruit people and into the vision and into the company, that their visions can fit within ours. And the limiter that it felt like we had at Gym Launch was we had a vision for the industry. But at the same time, it was limited by gyms. You know, that was our clientele. And so beyond gyms, we couldn't go into like a greater vision. And so it felt at times very limiting because, you know, people would pursue opportunities where they could see more runway for themselves within the organization compared to ours. Rightfully so.
When you talk about company size, like let's take Gym Launch for example, the moment of sale, like what was that moment like? And I mean, for some people those numbers are mind blowing, but I'm just curious as to what that meant to you and Alex at the time.
I think selling a business, more of the emotional up and down comes before. The moment itself was very unfulfilling. It was just me and Alex sitting alone in a hotel room when it happened, because you don't know when it's going to happen. You can target a date, but you might be anywhere when it happens. And we just happened to be on the last day of a vacation in Mexico, because we had actually planned the vacation to be after the sale, but the sale went too long, and so we were there through the last few weeks of the sale, which was very stressful. So I think all the times leading up to it, and all the micro decisions, signing contracts, making decisions, telling different people on our team it was going to happen, those were harder for me than the actual moment. And I think in the moment, I was like, we did it. You know, we did what we said we were going to do, like prove a point that we could sell this, we could build a sellable company and show other people it's possible. And I felt excited because I knew what we were going to do next, which was acquisition.com. But at the same time, and I think this was probably more how Alex felt in the moment, I'm not going to speak for him, but I'm just guessing, I just remember he didn't talk for like 3 hours. You know, we went to breakfast and we just didn't speak. He was just quiet. And I was like, what's wrong? I'm like hoping he's not like, I regret that, you know? He's like, I don't know. And I think somewhat of the feeling was that what a lot of people don't know is that about 19 months prior to that, we met with some of the biggest PE firms that existed. And we had the company valued, and they said that right now you could sell the company for 150 million. But if you just wait a year and you add in this technology that you're building right now, you could sell it for 350, 500 million. So to sell the business for 50 million, when your expectation and that you know you could have sold it 19 months earlier for 150, but then COVID hit. So when they told us to wait and to build this thing, and we listened, and I remember thinking, all my friends have said, you can always sell, you can never sell too early, but you can sell too late. But it felt still pretty early. So I was like, it feels too early, you know? I don't think a lot of people understand that it was disheartening because we were going through the process of prepping the company to sell, and then COVID hit. And the company took a huge haircut, you know, like cut our EBITDA in half. Not to mention now you're in an industry that nobody wants to buy anything in. But we had already gotten so excited about starting acquisition.com that we were like, I don't want to keep doing this. But it also feels like, holy crap, are we going to leave that much money on the table? But then there's the other thought, well, what's going to happen? Is it really going to go back to where it was? And so I think there was a lot of conflict throughout the entire process because I felt very like a sense of, I definitely felt angry at times because I felt like, God, I'm ignorant. And that's why we didn't sell earlier. If I had known, like there's so many outside forces waiting to kill your business. You know, COVID was one that obviously affected us greatly. And, you know, obviously I'm like, dang, would have been cooler to sell it for 150 million. And obviously the business is worth a lot more today than we sold it for. So I think that's why, like, when the sale was done, it felt relieving because we had for so long had this vision of acquisition.com that we wanted to pursue, and we weren't able to because we were like, well, if the company doesn't sell, what if we have two businesses? That's not acceptable. So it felt relieving. At the same time, I think we both thought many times in the beginning, we're like, was that the right move? You know, like, was that the right decision to make? And it was, because it gave us a lot of the skills and the knowledge that we have now that allows us to do a lot of things in acquisition.com. But at the same time, if I went back with the skills I have now, I would have never sold the company.
I'm going to take it back into sort of I can see why it was frustrating, you know, massively, but also just talking from the young woman who was selling at Planet Fitness. When was there a part of her looking at 50 million hitting an account and going, what the fuck? Like, was there any of that? Did you think about just going, you know what, we can just be out here, like we could, you know, we can just chill, we've got money for the rest of our lives if we want to?
Yeah, it sounds very depressing. Like if we were to sell the business and then just put it into real estate or into the S&P or like, you know, treasuries or whatever, we could have gotten great returns on that. And that is definitely a possibility. But then what do we do? You know, like really, what do I do until I die?
But most people are like, oh, go to the restaurant, go on holidays. You know, yeah, what is that?
You know, during the sale process, we had very little ability to do anything in the business because we had put, you know, CEO in place. And at the same time, we couldn't build something new. So we did a lot of traveling, seeing friends, eating out. And it was nice at times, but it didn't feel satisfying. And I think there's like a false sense of comfort found in living a life of luxury and comfort. And I just don't want that for myself. I think I'm really grateful that we had that time before the sale to kind of do that on a micro scale, because I see a lot of people who sell their company and they get really weird, you know? Like they stop, whatever they had that built that company, it leaves them. And I think one, it didn't feel like a big enough win for that to leave me. I know that sounds crazy. But two, I'm happier when I'm in motion, when I'm striving for something, when I'm doing something, when I'm trying to achieve a goal. And, you know, I think at the end of the day, it's like living a life just like being relaxed and not striving for anything and not trying to improve myself does not make a lot of the hard times worth it. And I think building something really epic and cool that can make the world better does.
So this one I'm asking for advice for maybe quite a few of our viewers, especially have businesses, they're entrepreneurs and all that kind of stuff, but also personally as well. If you were to take a business from a small business, you know, and I'm guessing the ones you acquire, like, well, first of all, let me just hit, like, the business that you acquire on a smaller scale, what does that look like?
Smaller side, I would say, you know, they're maybe 5-6 million in revenue.
So how would you take something like that to, like, what is your intention to take something like a $5 or $6 million business to, I don't know where it would be?
It really depends on the industry. So every industry, there are different size, you know, there are either smaller or bigger businesses in different industries because of market caps. And so if the business is in, let's think of an example one. So say we have, I'm going to give you a few examples of businesses. We have one business that we start off with, and it is a book publishing business. And we look at that business and we say, it's a good business, there's good returns, but what could we do to make this a more exciting business, or even, you know, increase the market cap? Well, we could turn it into a technology business. So we could take the way that we teach people to publish books and we could build it into technology. That makes for a more sellable business, a more scalable business, and it creates a business that has a much larger TAM than just a publishing business. And so that's an example of one that we've done with one of the companies in the portfolio. You know, another business that we, from the beginning, they were called Enchanted Fairies, and we met them, and they had a photography studio, and then they were teaching people how to start photography studios to have them like theirs. But their photography studio was so wildly successful, we said, why wouldn't you just open up a bunch of photography studios? And they were like, well, how do you do that? You know, because then you have to grow a big organization. But higher enterprise value, more sellable, more impactful, right? And so that business has now turned into a chain of almost 40 photography studios where we do children's photography. And so I think a lot of looking at business is trying to figure out, like, given the resources of the entrepreneur and the opportunity, first off, you have to ask yourself, is this the best vehicle to be in, given the resources and the opportunity? And so the first thing we do is determine, like, do we need to change vehicles? You know, book publishing versus technology. You know, selling people on how to do photography versus opening up a large scale chain. That's the first thing that you have to look at. And I think a lot of people that we meet with, they don't have the perspective to even know what vehicles are available to them. And so we tell them what there is. We say, these are the things that exist. You know, do you think one of these would be more suitable for your skill set and the goals you have? Because a lot of people that come to us, they want to build a huge, durable business that they can one day sell for hundreds of millions of dollars. I'm like, well, it's either going to be easy in the beginning and harder later on, or it is harder in the beginning and easier later on. And that's what it tends to be, is that people pick the vehicle that is easiest to start in the beginning. Seldom is that the vehicle that gets you to that crazy good sale. You know, it wasn't for Gym Launch. We had to completely change the business to get it to a place where, you know, it was valued at 150 million. And seldom is it for most businesses. So I think you have to ask yourself, like, where do you want the hard, in the beginning or at the end? And a lot of people say, I'd like it easier in the beginning, so they pick a vehicle that makes it easy. But we come in and usually what we do from the get-go is determine, like, do we need a different vehicle? Because if the goal is sell for 200 million, sell for 300 million, this is going to be very hard to get there. It'll be easy until we get to 10 million or 20 million or 30 million, and then it's going to be really hard. And I think that is a lot of what it is determining that piece combined with, do we have the people that can execute on that vehicle? Do we have the people that can drive it all the way to 200 million? Do we have the structure and do we have the skill? And that's why not just looking at businesses, but looking at the founders that run those businesses is so incredibly important, because oftentimes one of the biggest reasons people can't build their business to the height that they would like to is simply because of who they are. They are not of great enough character or skill that they cannot attract anybody with greater character or skill. So it's like when I think of how do I attract better talent, I think of how do I become better talent? And a lot of people don't see that. I see it because I could tell you we recruit for leadership in all of our portfolio companies. The ones where the founders have the least skill and experience and character are the hardest to get people to work for them. And therefore, it's very hard to build the business because you don't get the best people. And if you don't have the best people, it's much harder to make anything come to life.
One of the things I would have loved to cover, because I know you've had to deal with a lot of conflict online, and you've been super open and honest about so many aspects of your life that I think has combated that fantastically. But when it does come through, the conflict, or as a lot of people would call it, hate, how have you dealt with that? And has it been impactful on your life?
Yeah. I think it was very hard for me in the beginning to deal with negativity online because I think it never comes in the ways that you expect it. Like, you expect people will say one thing about you, but then it's almost like whatever blind spots you have about yourself that maybe you didn't notice or you didn't think were bad or didn't think were weird, people exposed you to them in the comments, right? And so then you're like, oh my gosh, I didn't think that was weird. Number one thing for me, my voice. Everyone always is tearing apart. Are you a smoker? Are you a tranny? Are you a, what's the third one? Smoker, tranny, or on steroids? And I'm like, how could anyone ever think that? And for the first, I want to say, year that I made content, it was hard for me. I was like, you know, first I took the, like, I'm going to read all the comments every time and just like take it to the gut, you know, and I'm going to get stronger if I read them. And, you know, that sometimes was really tough when, like, you know, a TikTok video would hit off and there would be like 1,000 comments saying like, are you on steroids? Are you a tranny? Are you a smoker? And I was like, wow, like nobody even listens to the content. And it wasn't until I had a conversation with Alex where I said, like, I hate that this bothers me. It doesn't change what I'm doing. I continue to make the content. I'm continuing to do everything I'm doing, but I am bothered by this. And he said, well, does part of you think it's true? And I was like, is what true? He's like, do you think your voice is weird? And I was like, well, it is kind of weird. Like, it's deep. It's always been deep and raspy. And he's like, so then why do you blame them for thinking this? And I was like, I don't. And it was like, in that moment, I was like, I agree with you. It does sound that way. I do sound like I'm on steroids or a tranny or a smoker. And you know what? That's my voice. And it is what it is. And I think it's funny because I remember that moment, and from that point on, I see the comments and it so seldom ever bugs me ever anymore. It's like, I agree. I have a weird voice. Own it. Just own your shit. And anytime I see anyone say anything about just anything negative in the comments, of course people at times are going to think, you know, because I'm married to Alex, maybe it's like, oh, she's just riding his coattails, or, you know, I got my nose done and they're like, oh, she's very insecure about all her looks. Like, of course, the things that I'm putting out there would make people think that. I don't blame them for thinking those things. Can I understand why people comment those things? No, but I'm also glad I don't have their life, and it is what it is. So I think for me, a lot of the times that I see people really struggling with the hate they get online, it's because in some way they agree with it. And it is fucking true. My voice is deep and weird.
Okay, so this is, I'd love to we'll round it off on this. I have one more question after this, but this is the theme, I think, of your life almost, is just ultimate ownership. Like, how important is it to just have ownership over everything?
I think it has brought me a sense of freedom, because when you blame other people, you steal yourself, you rob yourself of the opportunity to do anything about the situation, And so is it somebody else's fault? Maybe. Is it still your problem to deal with? Yes. And so, is it my fault my voice is so low? I don't know. Do I still get to deal with it? Yes. I think I've just thought that, is it my fault that my mother became an alcoholic and left me for days at a time? No. Is it my problem to deal with? Yes. I've just, seldom are the people who are the cause of our problems also the ones to fix them. It's us. And I just feel like a lot of time is wasted trying to figure out who we need to blame rather than just getting to the solution. And I don't know about you, but I would rather spend a lot more time solving problems than dwelling in them.
That's one of the most powerful things I've heard on ever for an interview. I really love that. I mean, as a 10-year-old to accept that as well is fucking mind-blowing. Thank you so much for today. The thing I usually sort of ask people, as a lot of people love to try and understand somebody's life, is what does a daily routine look like for you? And I know are you still doing the health and fitness and still working out every single day? I mean, how does that line up your day? How do you work a day? You're CEO of a huge company. What does it look like?
What's funny is my days never look the same, because some weeks I'm talking to every CEO of every portfolio company, and they all have shit burning, and they need to talk, and they need to have conversations. Some weeks I'm doing an event and 3 podcasts, and I'm doing a ton of content, and so it's filming almost every day. And then some weeks I'm just focused on the strategy and building our business and our holdco, and maybe hiring and onboarding. This week, for example, I'm onboarding a new CFO. That's the big focus. I'm also dealing with the second order consequences of having done a big book launch that we just did. Neither of those things are going to occur really ever again for years, right? And so I think that's actually what I love about what I do, is that it changes every day. The way I approach my days is I have things I do every day. I walk with Alex every day. We try to have a meal together every day. I work out every day. I send thank yous and appreciation notes to my team every day. I check my inboxes every day. I work on projects every day. When I do those things changes based on everything else that's going on. And so I don't try to be rigid in terms of what do I do in the morning and at night and at this time and this time. I try to just say I look at my calendar and say where can I fit this in? And that is what works for me. I think that when I've tried to be rigid in the past about how my routine looks and how my schedule looks, it ends up in me being much more stressed. But if I approach it with how can I be flexible and still get everything done, I feel much more relieved at the end of the day.
I love that. But I have to follow up with one more. Is that a skill that you learn to be able to move between things? Because I struggle I have to be focused on one task, and then to move to another feels so difficult for me.
I think it takes practice. So in the beginning, to go from a one-on-one with the team to a very serious talk with the portfolio CEO to doing content, basically what I see it is that it's the switching of hats. Because the truth is that how we behave in front of how you talk to me, how you talk to her, how you talk to your mom at home, whatever, different. You act a little bit differently. And I think that in the beginning, that's very fatiguing for people, to be able to have the context of a situation and show up a little bit differently based on what's needed of you at the time. I just think most people then say, I need to be able to only do this thing because otherwise I'm not good at it. But I said, my job is to be able to do all these things. So what I need to get really good at is switching, knowing what hat I'm wearing, and that I don't have to feel excited to do the next thing. I don't have to feel like making content. I don't have to feel like talking to the CEO, but but I can behave in a way that gets me the outcome I want. And that has worked really well for me, is like just knowing that it's all just behavior. It's not how I feel. So even though I might not feel like switching between things, I still can.
Thank you so much for that. Thank you for today. Where can people find you? Like, where would you like send somebody for like the best resources on yourself?
I think that my podcast, Build, on Spotify, iTunes, it's just Build with Leila Hormozi. I think that that's some of my best content, and it's my fastest growing platform. And then second to that is YouTube. I think both of those are longer form. So if somebody's trying to learn how to build a business, how to build up people, how to be a leader or a great CEO, those are probably the first two spots I would start.
Thank you so much for today. That's fantastic.
Thank you so much to Leila for doing this with us. We flew out to Vegas to be able to film this, and it was only made possible by the kindness of Leila and her team, and also you guys, everyone who supported us at mulliganbrothers.com. That's why we're having an end of summer sale where it's buy one, get one free across all of the t-shirts, and the Not a Journal is heavily discounted, and the Memento Mori poster is heavily discounted. Use code SALE at checkout for buy one, get one free. The link is in the description. This conversation with Leila has me thinking about that concept of thinking small and running a small business is the same as thinking big and running a big business. It's just about the mindset and the shift in mindset that you need to have. So thank you so much to Leila. It's been absolutely wonderful. We will be back in Vegas to hopefully speak with Leila again in the future. Have a blessed and productive day, and I'll see you in the next one. Peace.